You want the truth, not the version they put in the archives, the real one. I was there. I stood maybe 30 feet away when an alien princess, a woman whose bloodline ruled 1,000 worlds before humans even had fire, went completely silent in front of 10,000 delegates. Silent, in a hall built for speeches. And then she said 7 words. 7, that's all it took to make the whole galaxy stop breathing. But if I just tell you those 7 words now, they won't mean anything. They'll sound like a line from a cheap drama feed. You have to know the kid first. You have to know what he did out there in the cold, where nobody was watching, where there were no cameras and no reason on God's green earth for him to do it. So let me start where it started. On a rusted-out way station nobody important had ever heard of. Let me tell you about Draywick. Draywick Station sat at the ragged edge of what we called human space, which is a generous way of saying it sat where nobody else wanted to be. It hung above a dead moon, all gray rock and old craters, spinning slow so the gravity felt about 3/4 right. Everything on that station leaned a little. Doors stuck. The heaters groaned like old men in the morning. You got used to it. We were fuel and repair mostly. A pit stop. Ships coming in off the long dark lanes would dock, top off, patch a hull crack, buy something warm to eat and leave. We didn't matter much in the big picture, and back then neither did humans. I should explain that part, because if you're young you might not remember how it was. Humans were the new ones, the late arrivals. We'd stumbled out onto the galactic stage maybe 2 centuries before, blinking in the light, and the older species looked at us the way you'd look at a stray dog that wandered into a formal dinner. Curious, a little amused, ready to have it removed. They had names for us. The polite ones called us the emergents. The less polite ones called us monkeys, jumpers, borrow-borns, because we didn't build most of our fancy tech. We bought it, traded for it, copied it. To them we were loud and reckless and short-lived. Barely 100 years, most of us, if we were lucky. To a species that measured a lifetime in thousands, we were mayflies. Here in the morning, gone by the evening. They weren't wrong that we were reckless. That's the part I want you to hold on to. I was a mechanic, Joss Farrow, 51 years old at the time, bad knee, worse temper, the kind of face that looks like it lost an argument with a wrench somewhere along the way. I'd been on Draywick 11 years. I liked it. Quiet. Nobody expected miracles from you out there. And then there was Cade. Cade Merrick came to the station when he was 19, skinny thing, ears that stuck out, hair he never bothered to cut right. He'd signed on as a med tech and rescue diver, which sounds impressive until you realize on Draywick it mostly meant patching up drunk haulers, and once, memorably, pulling a threned tourist out of the recycling chute after it got curious about where the water went. But the kid had something. I noticed it early. He couldn't leave a thing alone if it was hurting. Didn't matter what it was, a cracked coolant line, a stray cat that somehow lived in the cargo levels. Yeah, we had one, don't ask. A hauler pilot who came in shaking after a bad run. Cade would just go toward it. While everybody else stepped back, he stepped in, every single time. I used to tell him it'd get him killed. He'd grin at me, that gap-toothed grin, and say, "Then it'll get me killed doing something worth it, Joss." 19 years old. What do they know at 19? I bring all this up because you need to understand Cade wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero out of some feed. He wasn't strong, wasn't fast, wasn't trained for anything bigger than a station accident. When it all happened, he had a med kit, a pressure suit 2 sizes too big, and a stubborn streak the size of the dead moon we orbited. That's it, that's the whole arsenal. Remember that. The night it started was a slow one, 3rd shift, the kind of dead quiet where you can hear the station itself thinking. I was in the machine bay with my feet up, listening to the hum of the reactor 2 decks down. Cade was across from me, playing some card game against himself and losing. The big viewport showed nothing but stars and that gray moon turning below us, patient as ever. Then the comms lit up. Not our comms, the traffic board, the big one that tracks anything moving in our sector. It went from empty to screaming in about 4 seconds. A contact coming in fast, way too fast for our lane. Cade was up before I was. He always was. The station's night controller was a Threnid named Vesix, decent sort, 3 eyes, always nervous. Vesix's voice came over the intercom, and I could hear the shake in it. Bay Cruz, we have an inbound, unregistered approach vector. It's broadcasting a Dominion seal. That word landed like a dropped tool. Dominion. Let me make sure you understand what that meant. The Soonville Dominion was old. Not old like a country, old like a mountain range. They'd ruled a huge slice of the galactic core for longer than humans had existed as a species. Tall people, the Soonville silver-skinned, 7 feet if they were an inch, with eyes that caught light like water. Beautiful in a cold way. Untouchable. They didn't come to places like Draywick. They didn't come to human space at all. To them, we were a rumor from the edge. And now one of their ships was falling toward us out of the dark, screaming. I got to the viewport, Cade beside me, and there it was. You'd have known it was Soonville, even without the seal. Everything they made looked like it was carved rather than built, long, curved, pale, like a seashell dreamed up by an architect. This one should have been gorgeous. It was on fire. Not all of it, but the aft third glowed an ugly orange, and it was venting long silver plumes of atmosphere trailing behind it like torn ribbons. It was spinning, just slightly, the way a thing spins when nobody's holding it steady anymore. Nobody flying it right, or nobody flying it at all. And behind it, this is the part that made my stomach drop, behind it 3 more contacts, smaller, darker, hunting-shaped. Vesix's voice again, thin as wire. The pursuit craft are broadcasting nothing. No seal, no hail. Cade said it before I could. Vorn. I hated that he was right. The Vorn Reavers were exactly what they sounded like. Raiders. Scavengers with teeth. They ran the dead lanes on the borders, picking off crippled ships, ransoming what they could and butchering what they couldn't. Everybody knew about them. Nobody did anything about them, because they were somebody else's problem always, until suddenly they weren't. And here they were, chasing a Dominion vessel into our lap, on the slowest, deadest shift of the week. The Soonville ship broke transmission static, and then a voice came through. It wasn't calm. Soonville were always calm, it was practically their religion. This voice was not calm. Any station, any vessel, this is the escort ship Haveth of the 9th Dawn. We are carrying a member of the royal house. We are crippled. Our defenses are gone. We request, we beg, immediate. Then it cut, just gone. I looked at Vesix's feed. The Haveth had taken another hit. The Vorn were close now, close enough that I could see on the scope how they moved, patient, spreading out, hurting. They weren't in a hurry. They didn't need to be. Their prey was already dying. Here's the thing about Draywick. We had no guns. We were a fuel stop. Our whole defensive capability was one ancient point defense turret that hadn't been test-fired in a decade because the last time someone tried, it nearly cracked the docking ring. We could not fight the Vorn. We couldn't even scare them. But the Haveth was coming in anyway, falling toward our docking ring like a drowning man reaching for a rope, because we were the only rope in 100 light years. Vesix opened a channel to the whole station. 3 eyes, and I swear all 3 were wet. All personnel, we are advising the Dominion vessel to divert. We cannot defend against a Vorn incursion. If they dock here, the Reavers will follow, and this station is not equipped. Say that again, Cade said. He'd walked to the controller's station. 19 years old, in a jumpsuit with a coffee stain on it, and he walked right up to a Threnid 3 times his age and said it again. Say that again. You're telling them to go away. Vesix looked at him, miserable. Merrick, I have 400 souls on this station. If I bring the Vorn down on us. They've got a member of a royal house on a burning ship. And I have 400 people who are alive. Vesix's voice cracked. I'm sorry, I am. The math is the math. I want to be fair to Vesix here because it's easy to make him the villain and he wasn't. He was scared and he was responsible for a lot of people, and the calculation he was making was the calculation any reasonable person would make. You don't invite the wolves into the house to save one stranger. That's not cowardice. That's arithmetic. But Cade never was much for arithmetic. He stood there for a second. I watched him do the thing he did, that little shift, where he stopped being a skinny kid with stuck-out ears and became something harder to look away from. His jaw set. His shoulders came down. Then don't dock them, he said. Wave them off. But I'm taking a pod out to meet them, and I'm bringing off whoever I can before that ship comes apart. The whole bay went quiet. Vesix stared at him. You'll die. Maybe. The Vorn will target you. Maybe. You're one medtech in a rescue pod. You cannot save a royal vessel. And Cade said the thing I've never forgotten. He said it simple, not like a speech, like it was just obvious. I'm not trying to save the ship. I'm trying to save the person on it. I should have stopped him. That's the part I have to live with. I was 51. I was the adult in the room. I had the standing to grab that kid by the collar and lock him in a supply closet until the whole thing blew over, and by every measure of sense I should have. Instead, I heard myself say, "You're not going alone." He turned and looked at me, and for a second the hardness cracked and he was just a scared boy again. Joss. Somebody's got to fly the pod while you play doctor, and it's not gonna be you. You fly like you're drunk. I was already grabbing my suit. My hands weren't steady. Move. I'm not brave, understand. I want that on record. I've spent my whole life being not brave, and I was proud of it. Not brave people live longer. But there are moments where the not brave thing and the thing you can live with afterward split apart from each other, and you have to pick one. That was mine. I picked the one I could live with. Barely. We suited up in 90 seconds flat. Vesix didn't stop us. I think he wanted to. I think part of him was screaming to log our names and revoke our clearance. But another part of him, the part that made him a decent sort, just said quietly, Pod 3's fueled. Airlock's warm. Go with the tide, Pharaoh. Threned blessing. Go with the tide. I took it. We piled into Pod 3. It was a rescue pod, which meant it was ugly and fat and slow, built to nudge up against a crippled ship and haul people through a docking collar. It had no weapons. It had a med bay the size of a coffin and grabbing arms and a big soft nose for kissing broken hulls. I punched us out of the bay. The station fell away behind us, and then there was just the dark and the burning ship, and the three dark shapes closing in on it like patient sharks. Talk to me, Cade, I said, because I needed his voice. He was strapping into the med station, laying out gear with hands that shook and moved anyway. Get us to the forward section. Fires aft. If anyone's alive, they'll have run forward away from it. Collar up against that emergency lock. See the amber ring? That one. They'll shoot at us, the Vorn. Then fly good, Joss. I flew good, best I ever flew in my life. The Haveth filled the viewport now, huge and dying. Up close you could see the wounds, the hull peeled back where the Vorn had raked it, the fire chewing through the aft decks, the little frozen glitter of atmosphere still leaking into space. And bodies. I saw bodies. Soonville, silver and still, drifting where they'd been blown out, beautiful even dead. Especially dead. The Vorn saw us coming. Of course they did. One of the dark ships broke off from the pack and swung toward us, and I heard Cade suck in a breath. On the scope it lit up, targeting. A lock. That cold electronic hum that means something is about to end you. I did the only thing I could think of. I put the fat, ugly pod right up against the Haveth's burning hull and hugged it. Tucked us in tight. So tight the proximity alarm screamed. So tight the Vorn couldn't fire without risking their own prize. Because that's what the princess was to them. A prize. They didn't want to blow up the ship. They wanted what was inside it. That was the only reason we lived those first few minutes. The raiders were being careful, and their care bought us seconds. Collars up, I said. Go. Go, kid, go. Cade was already at the inner lock. The docking collar chunked into place against the amber ring, and the pod married itself to the ship, and Cade cracked the seal. Heat rolled in. Smoke. That smell, you don't forget it, the smell of a ship that's dying, scorched metal, and something worse underneath. Cade pulled his visor down and went through, into the ruined guts of a royal vessel, with nothing but a med kit and that stubbornness of his. I stayed with the pod. Somebody had to hold us against the hull. I sat there with my hands on the controls and the Vorn ship hanging outside the viewport like a held breath, and I listened to Cade's suit channel. I'm going to tell you what I heard, because that's the part nobody put in the archives. That's the part that's just his. Okay, he said, breathing hard. Okay, I'm in. Corridors, it's bad, Joss, it's real bad. Anybody alive? Working on it. I heard him moving. Heard his boots on a floor that wasn't meant to be walked on anymore, everything tilted, gravity failing in patches. I heard him find the first body and check it and swear softly and move on. Then another. Come on, he was saying mostly to himself. Come on, somebody be alive, please. You have to understand, he didn't know who was on that ship. He didn't know it was her. He didn't know he was about to become the human savior of an alien princess, the man the whole galaxy would argue about for 100 years. He didn't know any of that. He just wanted somebody to be alive. That's who he was, out there in the dark where nobody was watching, same as he was in the bright where they were. That's the whole thing about Cade. He didn't have two faces, he just had the one. Wait, he said suddenly, wait, I hear. And then I heard it too, faint through his channel. A sound, not Soonville calm, a voice, ragged, calling out in a language the suit's translator caught halfway through. Here, we are here, please, she is hurt. Cade broke into a run. They were in the forward observation lounge, 3 of them alive, out of a crew and household of 40. An old Soonville man, Cade told me later, he was the ship's chronicler, the keeper of records, ancient even by their standards. With a broken leg, he'd splinted himself using a curtain rod. A younger one, a guard, unconscious, breathing shallow, half his silver skin burned black. And between them, propped against the great cracked window with the stars pouring through it. Sorry. Cade didn't know she was a princess. Not at first. He told me she just looked like a hurt woman to him, tall, even sitting. Silver skin gone gray at the edges the way ours goes white when we're bleeding out. A long wound down her side that the old man had packed with his own robes. Eyes like water, half closed. And a stillness to her, not calm, exactly. The stillness of someone who has already decided they're going to die and has made their peace with it. The old man saw Cade and his 3 eyes. No, 2 eyes. Soonville have 2. I'm mixing them up with the Threnid, forgive me, it's been a long time. 2 eyes and they went wide. A human, he breathed. They sent a human. Nobody sent me, Cade said, already dropping to his knees beside the woman, already opening his kit. I sent me. How bad she hurt. You cannot, the old man said. You cannot touch her, she is. She's bleeding out is what she is. Cade's hands were on the wound, fast and sure. All the shake gone now because that's how he was. The fear left him the second there was something to do. Hold this. Press here. Hard. I don't care who she is. If she loses much more she's gone, you understand me. Press. And the old chronicler of the Soonville Dominion, keeper of 10,000 years of royal memory, pressed his ancient hands to the wound, because a 19-year-old human boy told him to. I heard all of this. Sitting in the pod, hands on the controls, the Vorn ship outside the window waiting. Then the woman spoke, first time. Her voice came through Cade's channel, thin but clear. Leave me, she said. Save them, take the guard and the old one. I am the one they want. If you take me, they will hunt you to the last star. Leave me, human, it is a command. And Cade, I swear to you, Cade laughed, not mean, just tired and disbelieving. Lady, he said, I've been ignoring commands my whole life. I'm real good at it. Now shut up and let me work. It took him 4 minutes to stabilize her. 4 minutes that felt like 4 years to me, holding that pod against the burning hull, watching the Vorn. Because the Vorn got tired of waiting. The dark ship outside my window shifted. I saw a hatch open on its underside and something detached, small, fast, purposeful. A boarding pod. They'd figured out we were pulling their prize off the ship, and they weren't going to let that happen. Cade, I said, and I hated how my voice sounded. Cade, we've got company. Boarders. They're coming for the same door you went in. Silence for a second, then, how long? 2 minutes, maybe less. Can you get us off the hull? Not till you're back aboard. I move now, I break the collar, you're stuck over there. I heard him breathe. I heard him make the calculation, the same one Vessex made, the same one everybody makes. 4 people to move, a princess who couldn't walk, a guard who couldn't wake, an old man who couldn't run, and 2 minutes. The math was the math. And Cade, God love him, looked at the math and threw it in the trash. Get ready to move on my word, he said. I'm bringing them all. Cade. All of them, Joss. What happened next I only got in pieces, through his channel and later from the old man, who told it better than I can because he saw it. The boarding pod hit the Haveth's hull maybe 40 feet from where Cade's collar was married on. The Vorn came through, 3 of them, the old man said, in black armor, with those wide flat blades they liked, because the Vorn didn't waste power cells on prey that couldn't shoot back. Cade heard them cut through the outer lock. He had the princess over one shoulder. She was 7 feet of dead weight, and he was 160 pounds soaking wet, and he carried her anyway, because the alternative was leaving her. He had the old man limping beside him, one hand on Cade's belt, and the guard, the big, burned, unconscious guard, Cade had rigged the old man's curtain rod and a strap into a drag harness, and he was hauling the guard behind him across the tilted floor like a sled. That's the image the old man gave me, years later, in that dry, ancient voice of his. A single human, small even by human standards, carrying one, guiding one, dragging one, moving toward a door with the reavers coming through the wall behind him. The Vorn caught them 10 feet from the collar. Cade heard the boots. He set the princess down, gently, the old man said, even then, even with death coming, he set her down gently against the wall. And then he turned around, this skinny medtech, and put himself between the raiders and the 3 people he was saving. He had no gun. I told you that. He had a med kit and a hull cutter, a little plasma torch, the kind you use to peel back damaged plating to reach a wound in a ship. It had a reach of about 8 inches, and it was meant for metal, not men. He turned it on. It made a small blue light. And Cade Merrick, 19 years old, said to 3 Vorn reavers, "You want them, you go through me first." The old man told me the reavers laughed. He said their laugh sounded like stones grinding. He said they came at Cade almost lazily, the way you'd swat something small. Here's what they didn't understand. Here's what none of them understood, not the Vorn, not the Dominion, not the whole watching galaxy that thought of us as mayflies. They didn't understand what a human will do when it decides that the thing behind it matters more than the thing in front of it. We're not strong, we're not fast, we die easy and we die young, but we do not stop. That's the secret nobody out there had figured out yet. You can hurt a human and the human keeps coming. You can put a human down and the human gets up. You can show a human the math, the cold, clean arithmetic that says lie down and die, and the human will look at you and spit and say, make me. Cade fought 3 armored reavers in a burning corridor with a torch meant for cutting metal. He got cut. Bad. The old man said the first blade opened his arm to the bone, and Cade just switched the torch to his other hand. The second one caught his side, and Cade jammed that little blue flame into the Reaver's face, and the raider went down screaming, clawing at its own helmet. The third got Cade around the throat, lifted him clean off the floor, and Cade drove the torch down into the joint of its armor at the shoulder, into the meat, and held it there, held it screaming, until the thing dropped him and reeled back. 3 Reavers, 2 down, 1 blind and burning. And 1 human, on his knees, bleeding from a dozen places, hauling himself back up on the wall because there were still people to move. "Joss," he said into the channel, and his voice was wrong, wet and small. "Joss, get ready, coming to you, coming now." I will remember the sound of that voice until I die. They came through the collar in a tangle. Cade shoved the old man through first, then the guard, sliding on the drag harness. Then he lifted the princess. I don't know how, I still don't know how. He was more blood than boy by then, and he pushed her through into the pod, into my arms. 7 feet of silver royalty landing on a rusted rescue pod floor. Cade came last, he always came last. He fell through the collar, and I hit the release before his feet were clear, and the pod tore away from the Haveth with a shriek, and I burned every drop of thrust that fat, ugly pod had, straight down toward Draywick, toward the dead gray moon, toward home. Behind us, the Haveth of the 9th Dawn finally gave up. The fire reached something vital, and the whole beautiful seashell of a ship came apart in a slow, silent bloom of light. The Vorn boarding pod went with it. The 3 dark ships scattered from the blast, and by the time they regrouped we were tucked back under Draywick's docking ring, 400 frightened souls and 1 point defense turret between us and the dark. The Vorn hung out there for an hour, circling, deciding. Then they left. I've thought about that a lot. Why they left? We couldn't have stopped them. Wessex couldn't have stopped them. Maybe they figured the prize was too damaged now to be worth the trouble. Maybe they'd lost too many boarders. Or maybe, and this is the thought I like, even if it's foolish, maybe they just seen something out there in that corridor that they didn't have a word for. A creature that shouldn't have one and wouldn't lie down. Maybe that unsettled even them. I don't know, I'm a mechanic. I fix engines. I don't know why Reavers do what they do. I only know they left and we lived, and in the med bay, Cade was dying. He'd lost too much blood. Way too much. Human blood, and we didn't have enough of the right type stored, and the nearest real hospital was 6 days out at best speed. I held his hand. I'm not ashamed to say it. 51 years old, and I held a boy's hand, and I told him he was an idiot, and I told him to hang on, and I told him all the things you tell someone when you have no power over whether they stay or go. And the princess, hurt as she was, wound packed on a cot next to his, the princess watched. She'd said nothing since the pod. Soonville calm had come back over her like a tide, but she watched Cade with those watercolored eyes, and when the med scanner started its slow, ugly falling tone, the one that means the body's giving up, she moved. She shouldn't have been able to. Her side was a ruin, but she pushed herself off her cot and knelt on the deck beside Cade, and she did something I didn't understand at the time. She rolled up her own sleeve. She found the line the med bay had put in her arm to keep her alive, and she pulled it out of herself and looked at me and said, "Put it in him." "That's lady, that's your blood, Soonville blood, it'll kill him, we can't. Our physiology is closer to yours than you know." Her voice was steady, royal, absolute. "We share more than your scholars admit. It is a guarded secret. I am unguarding it. Put my blood in him, human, or watch him die for the crime of saving me." I looked at the old chronicler. He was pale as death himself, but he nodded just once. So I did it. God forgive me if I was wrong, but the scanner was falling, and there was no time to be right. I hooked a princess of the Soonville Dominion into a dying human boy, and I let her ancient silver blood run down into his veins. And Cade Merrick did not die that night. It's strange, the things that change the galaxy. It wasn't a battle fleet. It wasn't a great treaty signed by great people. It was a boy with a torch and a princess who pulled a line out of her own arm on the floor of a rusted rescue pod above a moon nobody cared about. The Dominion arrived 4 days later. They came in force. You've never seen anything like it, and neither had we. A whole armada of those pale carved ships filling the space around Dreywick, so many that the dead moon disappeared behind them. The station, our poor leaning station, sat in the middle of that fleet like a pebble in a cathedral. We thought Wessex thought, I thought, everybody thought, we thought they'd come to blame us, to ask why a royal ship died on our doorstep. To find fault. That's what powerful people do, isn't it? They find fault with the small. Instead, the princess walked off Dreywick on her own 2 feet, healed enough to stand back straight, and she stopped at the airlock, and she turned around, and she looked at the crowd of frightened humans and aliens who'd gathered to watch. And she looked for Cade. He was in the back, of course he was, arm in a sling, side-stitched, face still gray, leaning on me because his legs weren't all the way back yet. Hiding, basically. He hated this part. He hated being looked at. She found him anyway. And Princess Usold Vonner of the Soonville Dominion, heir to 1,000 worlds, daughter of a bloodline older than human speech, walked across that docking bay through the parting crowd, and she stopped in front of a skinny 19-year-old medtech from nowhere. And she did the thing that started everything. She knelt. I need you to understand what that meant, because we didn't, not right away. The Soonville do not kneel. It's not that it's rare. It's that it does not happen. In 10,000 years of their recorded history, there were maybe 4 instances of a royal Soonville bending the knee, and every one of them was to a god. Their whole civilization was built on the idea that they bowed to no one below the divine. And she knelt to a human in front of her own fleet, in front of her own people, who watched from the ships and the docks and went utterly, deathly still. I owe you a debt, she said to Cade quietly, just for him, though the whole bay heard it. You do not know what you have done, you cannot know, but I do, and I will not let the galaxy forget it. Cade, being Cade, went bright red and mumbled, "You'd have done the same." And she looked up at him, and something crossed her face, grief, maybe, or shame, and she said, "No, I would not have. My people would not have. That is what you have shown us." Then she stood, and the moment passed, and there was protocol and paperwork and the Dominion's careful ancient machinery grinding into motion. But it was done. The thing was done. A princess had knelt to a mayfly, and 100 billion beings would hear about it within a month. But that wasn't the 7 words. That wasn't the thing I promised you at the start. That came later. That came at the assembly. They took him to the assembly. The great Galactic Assembly at the core, in a hall so big and so old that human history looked like a single afternoon inside it. 10,000 delegates, every species that mattered. The kind of place where the fate of whole regions got decided, and where humans, when we were mentioned at all, were mentioned the way you'd mention the weather on some distant world. In passing, without much interest. I went with him. He wouldn't go without me. "You're not leaving me alone with those people, Joss," he said, and I understood, so I went. They'd cleaned him up, put him in something formal that he kept tugging at. He looked terrified. He looked 19. He looked like exactly what he was, which was a kid from a fuel station who'd done a brave thing on a bad night and now had to stand in front of the whole galaxy and be looked at, which he hated more than the Reavers. Princess Usold stood to address the assembly. She'd fully healed by then. She stood tall and silver and terrible in the light, and the whole enormous hall fell quiet for her, because her blood commanded quiet the way ours commands nothing. She spoke about the attack, about the Haveth, about the 40 souls of her household who died in the dark. The assembly listened the way you listen to royalty, politely, patiently, waiting for it to be over. And then she stopped talking about the ship. And she turned, and she looked at Cade where he stood at the edge of that vast hall trying to disappear, and something in the whole room shifted, because they realized this wasn't going to be an ordinary speech. You call them emergents, she said to the assembly. Her voice was very quiet and it carried to every corner of that hall. You call them mayflies, borrowborns, monkeys. I have heard all of your words for them. I have used some of them myself. Nobody moved. 10,000 delegates. Nobody moved. My ship was dying, she said. My guards were dead. I gave the order to leave me because I am Soonville and we calculate, and the calculation said one life for many was correct. Every species in this hall would have obeyed that order. Every one of you would have called it wisdom. She let that sit. A human refused it. A human I had never met, who owed me nothing, who knew nothing of who I was. He looked at the correct and wise calculation and he threw it away, and he came into the fire for a stranger. She stepped down from the speaking dais. She was not supposed to do that. You could feel the whole assembly flinch at the breach of it. She walked toward Cade. The crowd parted the way it had on Draywick, and she stopped in front of him, this small, terrified boy, and she turned to face the 10,000 and she took his hand in hers. The whole galaxy was watching. This was carried live to 100 billion worlds. I saw the feed later. Every screen, everywhere, humans and aliens alike, all of them holding their breath at the same moment. And she said the 7 words, the ones I promised you, the ones that changed everything. She said, "This one came back, you never would." And then she was quiet, and she let it land. This one came back, you never would. 7 words. A whole galactic order, 10,000 years of we are old and they are young, we are wise and they are foolish, we are worthy and they are lesser. 7 words took it apart. Because every delegate in that hall knew it was true. Every single one of them had run the same calculation the princess ran, the one that says leave the stranger, save yourself. The math is the math. And every one of them knew that a human had looked at that math and gone into the fire anyway. The hall didn't erupt. It was too stunned to erupt. It just sat there in a silence I could feel from where I stood. The silence of a whole civilization realizing that the small, loud, reckless newcomers they'd been laughing at had something they themselves had lost so long ago they'd forgotten it was ever theirs. Cade stood there holding a princess's hand in front of the galaxy, red-faced, terrified 19, and he leaned over to me. I was close. I'd stayed close, and he whispered, "Joss, can we go home now?" That was him. That was always him. We went home. That's the true version, not the archive version. The archive makes it grand, makes it destiny, makes it two peoples finding each other across the stars. And I suppose it was that in the end. Things changed after those 7 words. Humans stopped being mayflies. There were treaties, alliances, a whole shifting of how the old species looked at the new ones. Historians will tell you it started that day in the assembly, and they're not wrong. But I was there for the real start. It wasn't in the assembly. It was in a burning corridor in the dark, where no one was watching and there was no reason on any world to do the right thing. That's where it started, with a skinny kid who couldn't leave a hurting thing alone, who looked at the math and threw it away. Who said you go through me first to 3 reavers, with a torch meant for cutting metal. People ask me sometimes what made him do it. What made Cade Merrick different? They want it to be some special thing, some secret, some greatness hidden in a small package. And I always tell them the truth, which is the same thing Cade would have told them if he ever talked about it, which he didn't. There was nothing special about him. That's the point. That's the whole beautiful, terrible point. He was ordinary, he was any of us. What he did in that corridor, any human might have done, on the right night, for the right stranger. That's what the princess understood when she knelt. That's what the galaxy understood when she said her 7 words. She wasn't kneeling to a hero. She was kneeling to what a hero is made of. To the thing that lives, small and stubborn and mostly forgotten, in all the reckless, short-lived mayfly hearts of my whole reckless, short-lived species. We come back, that's all. When it matters, when it's dark, when the math says don't, we come back. I've got that carved on his memorial now. Cade lived another 60 years, went on to do 100 quieter good things, and when he finally went, he went old and warm in his bed, which is more than a boy who fought reavers with a torch had any right to expect. On the stone under his name, I put the only words that ever fit him. He came back. That's it, that's the whole story. The galaxy remembers the 7 words the princess said, but I remember the 4 I put on the stone. And if you ever find yourself out there in the dark, with the math telling you to leave the stranger and save yourself, I hope you remember them too. He came back. Now go with the tide. You thought that was the end of it, so did I. A princess knelt to a mayfly. She said her 7 words to the whole galaxy. Humans stopped being a joke. Roll credits, right? Everybody goes home warm and the stars align, and we all learn a lesson about how the small and reckless can teach the old and proud a thing or two. That's how the archive tells it, clean, finished. But I've lived long enough to know something the archives don't like to admit. When you shame the powerful in front of everyone, even when you're right, especially when you're right, you don't make a friend of them. You make an enemy that never forgets. Usold knelt to Cade in front of her whole fleet, in front of 10,000 delegates, and somewhere in that hall, watching a princess of the Soonville bend her knee to a human boy, there was a man whose whole life had been built on the idea that such a thing could never, ever happen. His name was Saravane Kaith, High Lord of the Third Spire, and he did not clap. Let me tell you what he did instead, because this is the part they left out. This is the part where the 7 words nearly got us all killed. I need to set the scene, because a couple of years had gone by and things had changed. Humans were rising, that's the honest word for it. After the assembly, doors opened that had been shut to us for 2 centuries. Trade routes, seats. Real seats in real rooms where real things got decided. Soonville merchants started coming to human space. Carefully, at first, the way you test ice on a pond. Then less carefully. Draywick, my leaning, rusted little Draywick, got busy. We actually had to build a second docking ring. Me, retired by then, sat in the cantina and watched silver ships dock next to human haulers like it was nothing, like it had always been that way, and I'd shake my head and order another drink. Cade was a man grown now. 22, 23. Still skinny. Still couldn't cut his own hair right. But the galaxy knew his face, and he hated that, so mostly he stayed on the fringe worlds doing the quiet good things he was good at. He'd become a kind of roving med-tech for the frontier, going where the colonies were thin and the help was thinner. He didn't do it for the fame. He did it because there were hurting things out there and he still couldn't leave them alone. Some men, the metal changes them. Cade, the metal just embarrassed him. And Usold, Princess Usold, was fighting a war I didn't even know about. Not a shooting war, not then. A quiet one in the halls of her own people, because when she knelt she didn't just honor a human. She cracked something open in Soonville society, a question they'd never had to ask before. If a mayfly can be worthy, then what are we? If worth isn't in the blood and the years, where is it? Some of the Soonville loved that question, the young ones mostly. They'd grown tired of 10,000 years of cold arithmetic. And some of them hated it with everything they had, the ones who'd built their whole standing on being old and pure and above, the ones like Saravane Kaith. For 2 years Kaith worked, quietly. He built a faction. He whispered in the right spires. He called Usold's kneeling a moment of trauma, a lapse, an embarrassment the Dominion should quietly bury and forget. He argued that the humans were a contagion, loud, short-lived, spreading their recklessness like a fever through the clean halls of galactic order. And when whispering wasn't enough, Kaith decided he needed proof. He needed to show the whole galaxy that Usold had been wrong. That the human came back once by luck, and that if you scratched the surface, humans were exactly the selfish, small, calculating creatures everyone had always assumed. So he built a test. A cruel one. Here's what I understood only later, piecing it together from people who were in rooms I'd never be allowed in. Kythe couldn't attack humans openly. The alliance was too fresh, too popular, and Ussold too watched. But there are ways to arrange a disaster without your fingerprints on it. There are people in the dark you can pay. The Vorn, for instance. The same reavers who'd chased the Haveth into our lap 2 years before. Kythe found them, or his people did, and he gave them a target and a promise: you hit this place, you take what you want, and no Dominion fleet will come to stop you. We'll look the other way, consider it a gift. The target was a colony called Talos Reach. I'd never been there. Most people hadn't. It was a mixed world, that was the whole point of it, and the whole reason Kythe chose it. Talos Reach was one of the first colonies where humans and Soonville lived together. On purpose. A little experiment in the new order. Maybe 4,000 souls total, half of each, farming a thin green world and mining the ridges and trying to prove that the two peoples could share a home. It was everything Kythe hated, a place where the line between old and new had gone soft. And he handed it to the reavers. The idea was simple and vicious. The Vorn would descend on Talos Reach. In the panic, Kythe was betting on human nature, his version of it. He was betting the humans would run, grab their families, grab their ships, and flee, leaving the slower Soonville colonists behind to die. And when the smoke cleared, Kythe would have his proof, broadcast to the whole galaxy. Look what the mayflies do when it truly costs them something. They calculate, they flee, they save themselves. Ussold knelt to a fluke. This is what they really are. That was the plan. That was the whole cold clockwork of it. He was so sure. That's the thing about men like Kythe. They're so sure they understand you because they've decided who you are before they ever watched you bleed. He forgot something. He forgot that Cade Merrick was on Talos Reach that week. Not as a hero, not on a mission. Just passing through, running a vaccination clinic for the colony's children, human and Soonville both, because a frontier world like that couldn't hold a proper doctor and he'd heard they needed hands. That's all. He was there giving shots to kids and complaining about the food, the same as any ordinary man. The galaxy's most famous human, in the exact wrong place, at the exact wrong time. Or the exact right place, depends how you look at it. I was on Draywick when the first reports came through. Half a galaxy away, useless, an old man in a cantina, and I heard the word Talos Reach and Vorn in the same sentence, and my drink stopped halfway to my mouth. Then I heard Cade was there, and the drink never made it. I set it down and I didn't pick it up again for 3 days. I couldn't do anything. Understand that. I want you to understand how it feels to be old and far away and love someone who's walking into fire, and to be able to do nothing but watch the feeds and pray to a god I'd mostly stopped believing in. I'd flown a pod against reavers once. I couldn't fly a chair across the cantina now. All I could do was watch. So I watched. The whole galaxy watched in the end because Kythe made sure of it. He'd arranged for the disaster to be visible. He wanted the footage. He wanted the proof broadcast wide. He got his broadcast, just not the one he wanted. The Vorn came down on Talos Reach at dawn, local time. The colonists told it to me later, the ones who lived, and their voices always went quiet at this part, the way people's voices do when they're describing something they still see when they close their eyes. The sky, they said. First it was that thin green morning, mist on the ridges, farm smoke rising. Then the sky filled with the dark hunting shapes, more than a dozen of them, and the mist lit up orange as the first strikes hit the outer fields. There was no defense. Talos Reach was a farm world. It had a handful of old orbital charges and a militia with hunting weapons. Against a Vorn raiding fleet, that was nothing. That was a candle against a flood. And the panic came, just like Kythe knew it would. 4,000 people, and the sky on fire, and everyone running for the landing field where the ships were. Here's where Kythe's whole theory of us was supposed to prove out. The human colonists reached the ships first, of course they did. They were faster, shorter-lived species tend to move quick when they're scared. The ships had room. Not enough for everyone, not close, but enough to save the humans if the humans just went. The math was the math. Kaith had built his whole gamble on the math. And on a landing field on a burning world, 4,000 terrified people ran into the oldest question there is: the stranger or yourself? The slow ones behind you or the open ramp in front of you? Come back or leave. I've told you what one human did in a corridor, once in the dark. Now let me tell you what a whole colony of them did in the light, with the galaxy watching. They came back. It didn't start as a grand thing. It never does. The old man who told me about the corridor, the Soonville chronicler, he taught me that. Grand things start small, with one person doing one stubborn thing. On the landing field, the one person was a hauler captain. Her name was Imogen Rell. Middle-aged, heavyset, ran cargo between the frontier worlds, tough as boot leather. She had a ship with maybe 40 seats, and she'd already loaded 38 humans, and she was one breath from sealing the ramp and flying, and she looked back across the field. And she saw the Soonville colonists, the slow ones. The old ones, the young ones, the families who couldn't run as fast, standing at the edge of the field watching the human ships fill up with human bodies. Understanding, you could see them understand it, Rell said. That look, understanding they'd been left to die. Rell was not a hero. She said so herself later, angrily, when people tried to make her one. She was a cargo captain with a bad hip and a debt on her ship. She looked at her 38 loaded seats and the open sky and the math that said go now, you've done enough. And she keyed the colony channel and said loud, so it carried across the whole field. Dump the cargo, all of you, dump it and load people, we are not leaving them. That's it, that's all it took. One tired cargo captain who couldn't do the math right. And here's the thing Kaith never understood, the thing none of them understood, because you can only understand it by watching us do it. It's contagious. Courage in a human is a contagious thing. One person comes back, and it gives everyone else permission to be who they were afraid to be. The whole field turned. Ramps that were closing opened again. Humans who were strapped in their seats unstrapped and ran back out into the fire to carry Soonville children aboard. Cargo, food, tools, everything a frontier world hoards like gold, got dumped in the dirt to make room for slow silver bodies. 4,000 people, and the sky on fire, and the mayflies came back. Every one of them, not most, not a heroic few, everyone, because once it started, no one could be the one who didn't. Kaith's proof was filming itself, live, to the whole galaxy, and it was proving the exact opposite of what he'd built it to prove. But the Vorn were still coming. Because loading everyone takes time, and time was the one thing a burning world doesn't give you. The Reavers pushed in toward the landing field, and now they weren't strafing. Now they were landing troops, because a full colony was a full colony of prizes, and the Vorn didn't leave prizes on the ground. The evacuation needed minutes it didn't have. Somebody had to buy those minutes. Somebody had to stand between the Reavers and the field. And you already know who. Cade had been at the clinic when it started. He'd spent the first part of the attack doing exactly what you'd expect, pulling children out of collapsed buildings, patching the wounded, moving people toward the field. Ordinary Cade things. Nobody watching things. But when the Vorn troops landed and started pushing toward the loading ships, Cade did the math the same as everyone, and threw it away the same as always. He wasn't 19 anymore. He wasn't alone this time either. That's the part that gets me. A couple of years back in that corridor, he'd been one skinny kid with a torch. This time, when he grabbed a militia rifle and turned to face the Reavers coming across the field, he wasn't the only one who turned. The colony militia turned with him, human and Soonville both. And they weren't soldiers. They were farmers and miners and a mid-tech. But they'd all just watched a cargo captain come back, and a whole field of people come back, and something had gotten into them that Kaith had no word for. 40 of them maybe, against a Vorn ground assault, behind a low ridge at the edge of the landing field, with hunting rifles and mining charges and whatever they could grab. Cade got up on that ridge where everyone could see him. The one man in the galaxy the Reavers might actually recognize, might actually fear a little after the Havoth. And he did the thing he did, the shift, from skinny nobody into something you couldn't look away from. The feeds caught it, his voice ragged, carrying over the militia line. He didn't give a grand speech. Cade never did. He just said, "Hold the ridge. Every minute we hold is a ship that gets away. That's the whole job, hold the ridge." And they held the ridge. I have watched that footage more times than is healthy for an old man. I know every second of it. Let me give you the part that matters. They shouldn't have held. 40 farmers against Vorn Reavers is not a fight, it's a delay at best, and Cade knew it, and every person on that ridge knew it. They were buying time with their bodies. That was the arrangement. Everyone understood the arrangement. And still, every time the Reavers pushed and a section of the line broke, someone came back for it. That was the pattern the whole battle. A human would go down and a Soonville colonist would drag them back behind the ridge. A Soonville would get cut off and 3 humans would go out into the open to pull them in. Back and forth, both peoples, over and over, nobody left where they fell, nobody abandoned to the math. The old Soonville way was to calculate, one for many, wise, correct. The new way, the way Ussold had cracked open when she knelt, the way that was spreading now like fire through her own people, the new way was nobody gets left. And on that ridge, for the first time, Soonville colonists fought by that new rule too. They'd caught it from us. That's what Kythe could never have predicted. He thought he was testing whether humans would rise to the Soonville standard. He never imagined the Soonville would fall to ours. That fall is the wrong word. That it was the best thing that ever happened to them. Cade held the ridge for 19 minutes, long enough for the last ship to lift off the field, long enough for 4,000 people, every single one, to get off Talos' reach. He was one of the last off the ground. Of course he was. He always came back, and coming back means you leave last. He took a wound doing it, a bad one, across the back, when he turned to drag a Soonville child toward the final shuttle and put himself between the child and the Reaver line. He made it aboard. Barely. Bleeding, gray, furious at his own body, but aboard. The colony of Talos' reach burned to the ground behind them. Kythe got his ashes. He got his broadcast, his footage, his live feed to the whole galaxy. And what the whole galaxy saw live was not what he'd promised the Vorn or himself. What the galaxy saw was 4,000 people, human and Soonville, old order and new, refuse the math together. What the galaxy saw was a colony choose to lose everything it owned rather than lose a single life. What the galaxy saw was the second answer to the same question, and this time it wasn't one boy in a corridor that skeptics could call a fluke. This time it was a whole people. This time it was a choice, made 4,000 times over in the light with the cameras rolling. You can call one man a fluke. You cannot call 4,000 a fluke. Kythe had wanted proof. He got it. The reckoning came fast, and it came in the assembly again, because that's where these things go. Kythe had overreached, and he'd left threads, and Ussold, who was many things but never a fool, pulled them. It came out. The payment to the Vorn. The promise to look the other way. The whole cold machine of it, exposed to the same 10,000 delegates who just watched Talos' reach burn on the feeds. A Soonville High Lord had hired Reavers to slaughter a colony to make a political point, to prove humans were selfish. And the colony had answered by being the least selfish thing the galaxy had ever seen. I wasn't there for that session, but I saw the feed, same as everyone. Ussold didn't rage. That was the terrible thing, she didn't raise her voice. She stood in front of the assembly, silver and cold and absolutely calm, Soonville calm, the real thing, the kind that's more frightening than any fury, and she laid out what Kythe had done, piece by piece, in that quiet voice that carried to every corner. And when she was done, she looked at High Lord Saravane Kaith across that vast hall, and she said the second thing. The thing that people forget, because the 7 words from the first time are more famous. But I think the second thing was harder and truer and cost her more. She said, "You wanted to prove they would not come back, and a colony of my own people learned from them how to come back for each other." She let it sit. "That is your legacy, Saravane. You tried to shame the humans. Instead, you taught the Soonville to be worthy of them. History will thank you for it. It will just never forgive you." Kaith fell that day, not to violence, to something worse for a man like him, to irrelevance. His faction dissolved, his spire emptied. He'd spent 2 years and a colony's worth of lives to prove humans were small, and all he'd done was make them permanent. The last I heard of Saravane Kaith, he'd retreated to some far pale world and gone silent, an old lord in an empty hall, watching the order he'd defended his whole life reshape itself around the thing he'd hated most. I don't feel sorry for him, but I think about him. I think about how a man can be so certain he understands you that he'll burn a world to prove it, and never once consider that he might just be wrong about who you are. He was wrong about who we are. They all were once. That's the whole story of my people if you want it in a sentence. They were all wrong about who we are until we showed them. Cade lived. In case you were worried. That wound was bad and it was close, but the Soonville had learned a thing or two about human blood by then. Ussold had seen to that quietly in the years since the pod, and they had what he needed. He healed. Slower than he liked. He always healed slower than he liked. I went to see him after. Flew out to the med station where they'd taken him, an old man's long slow journey, and I sat by his bed the way I'd sat by it once before in a rescue pod, and I held his hand the way I'd held it then, and I called him an idiot, the way I always did. He grinned at me, gap-toothed, tired, older around the eyes now but the same underneath. "Missed you too, Joss." "You could have run," I told him. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I needed to hear him say it. "Whole field of ships. You could have been on the first one. Nobody would have blamed the galaxy's own hero for saving himself." And Cade looked at me like I'd said something strange, genuinely strange, like I'd asked him why water was wet. "Run where?" he said. "The kids were still on the ground." That was it. That was the whole answer. The kids were still on the ground, like there was no decision in it at all, like the math had never even reached him, like it got to the door of him and just couldn't find a way in. I've thought about that answer for the rest of my life. I think it's the closest anyone ever got to explaining Cade Merrick. There was no calculation in him. That part was just missing, or maybe it was there and he'd painted over it so many times it stopped working. When there was a hurting thing, he went toward it. When there were people on the ground, he stayed. It wasn't brave exactly, because brave means you feel the fear and push through it, and I don't think Cade felt it the way the rest of us do. It was simpler than brave. It was just who he was all the way down. The galaxy made him a symbol. 2 peoples joined across the stars, the human who taught the Soonville to come back. But he was never a symbol to me. He was a skinny kid who couldn't cut his own hair, who once pulled a thrennet out of a recycling chute, who gave shots to farm kids because a colony needed hands. The symbol is what they carve on monuments. The kid is what I got to keep. I know which one I'd rather have. Here's how it ends, the real ending, not the archive one. Years later, many years, I was very old by then, near the end of my own short, reckless mayfly life. They held a ceremony on the world they rebuilt where Talos Reach had been. A new colony, human and Soonville, bigger than the first, built on the ashes of Kaith's cruelty. They named it after the cargo captain in the end, Rel's Landing. She hated that even more than Cade hated being a hero. Good, she earned the annoyance. They asked Cade to speak. He was middle-aged by then, still couldn't do it right, still went red in the face in front of a crowd. And Ussold was there, princess no longer. She'd risen higher than that, though she still moved like the same woman who'd knelt on a rusted pod floor and pulled a line out of her own arm. The whole thing was very grand. Speeches, banners, both peoples in their finery, and they wanted Cade to say something worthy of the moment, something for the monuments, something to match the 7 words Ussold had once said to the galaxy. Cade got up, looked at the crowd, went red, tugged at his collar. And he said, "I was there, I heard it. I'll swear to it on anything you like," he said. "I don't have a speech, I'm sorry, I never do." A pause, that gap-toothed grin older now. I keep hearing people say we saved each other, humans and Soonville, like it was some big thing we decided to do." He shook his head. "It wasn't a big thing, it's never a big thing. It's just when someone's still on the ground you go get them, that's all. You don't leave people on the ground." He shrugged like it was obvious, like it had always been obvious. "That's not a human thing or a Soonville thing. I think that's just what it means to be worth anything at all. We forgot it. Some of us, for a while. And then we remembered it together." He looked out at both peoples, silver and pink, old and young, standing on the ashes of a place that had burned. "So don't build me a statue," he said. "Build me a colony where nobody gets left on the ground. That's the only monument I want." And he sat down, red as a sunrise, furious he'd had to talk at all. They built the colony. They built a lot of them after. And on every one of them, human in Soonville, they carry the same rule now. The rule that a cargo captain shouted across a burning field, and a medtech held a ridge for, and a princess knelt to honor. Nobody gets left on the ground. That's the true story, both halves of it. The archive will tell you a princess found her human savior, and said 7 words that shocked the galaxy, and the 2 peoples lived happily after. And that's not wrong. It's just small. It's the postcard version of a thing that was bigger and harder and truer than a postcard can hold. The real story is this. The galaxy spent 10,000 years measuring worth in blood and years. In how old you were, how strong, how pure, how much you could calculate. And a species of mayflies came along, loud, short-lived, reckless, dying young, and showed them all that worth was never in any of that. Worth is in whether you come back, whether you go get the one still on the ground, whether you look at the cold, clean math that says save yourself and throw it in the fire and walk into the fire after it. We taught the galaxy that, us, the mayflies, the borrow-borns, the ones they laughed at. And it started with a skinny kid and a torch in the dark, where no one was watching. It always starts there. Remember that if you remember nothing else I've told you. The grand things, the alliances, the monuments, the 7 famous words, they all start small in the dark, with one ordinary person doing one stubborn thing that the math says they shouldn't. Cade's gone now, went old and warm in his bed like I told you, more than a boy who held a ridge had any right to expect. Ussold saw him buried herself. A princess of the Soonville, standing at a human grave, and this time she didn't kneel. She'd learned better by then. She just stood, straight and silver, and stayed until the last of us had gone. Because you don't leave people on the ground. Not even when they're already in it.